Every month, like clockwork, I make the journey upstate to visit my folks. It's a tradition, a ritual almost, born out of necessity but softened by the passage of time. The drive is long, often monotonous, a seamless blend of highways and byways, framed by the ever-changing but ever-the-same landscape. Yet there's a particular point along this well-trodden path that breaks the monotony: Mike's Motor Mart. It's not much to look at, just a small, rundown gas station clinging to the edge of civilization, where the remnants of the city's hustler fade into the whispers of the countryside. But for me, it's a landmark, a beacon marking the halfway point of my journey, a place where I can stretch my legs, grab a bite, and prepare myself for the solitude of the road ahead. The old owner, Mike, was a character straight out of a storybook, a grizzled man with a permanent oil stain on his shirt and stories that seemed to stretch even longer than the roads I was traveling. But time moves on, and so did Mike, leaving his station in the hands of a new proprietor, Eli. Eli was a stark contrast to Mike, with his too bright smile and overly eager greetings. "Welcome to Mike's Motor Mart," he'd bellow, as if he were announcing the arrival of a long-lost friend rather than a weary traveler in need of a rest stop. It was jarring at first, but I chalked it up to his attempts at making a good impression, or perhaps the overzealous enthusiasm of a new business owner. On this particular visit, the sky was overcast, heavy clouds hanging low, as if they too were tired from their endless journey. The air was thick with an impending storm, adding a sense of urgency to my stop. I pulled into the station, the familiar chime of the service bell cutting through the silence like a welcome greeting. As I filled up my tank, I couldn't help but notice the changes Eli had made to the place. The once fading sign was now bright and polished, boasting a fresh coat of paint that seemed out of place in the rugged landscape. The windows, previously clouded with years of neglect, now offered a clear view inside, where I could see Eli moving about, tidying up with an unsettling fervor. Finishing up at the pump, I made my way inside, the bell above the door announcing my entrance with a jarring ring. The interior was markedly different, cleaner, yet somehow less welcoming. The shelves were neatly stocked, the floor freshly mopped, the air tinged with the smell of strong disinfectant, masking something else, something less pleasant. Eli emerged from the back, his smile wide, his eyes scanning me over. "First time seeing the new improvements?" he asked, his voice dripping with a pride that didn't quite reach his eyes. I nodded, offering a polite smile, but something felt off. The atmosphere was too sterile, too forced, as if the place were holding its breath, hiding its true nature beneath a veneer of normalcy. I excused myself to use the washroom, a small detached building at the back of the lot. As I made my way across the gravel, the first drops of rain began to fall, light at first, then growing in intensity, as if heralding the descent into something unknown, something sinister. The door creaked ominously as I opened it, the dim light flickering uncertainly, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. And that's when I noticed the smell, a sickly sweet odor that clung to the air, heavy and unyielding. It was the smell of decay, masked by the sharp tang of bleach, creating a dissonant harmony that made my stomach churn. I should have left then, should have listened to the screaming instincts telling me something was terribly wrong. But curiosity, that reckless companion, urged me forward, deeper into the belly of the washroom, where I would discover a horror that would forever stain the fabric of my reality. The light flickered again, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to crawl along the cracked tiles, reaching out towards me as if warning me to turn back. But there I stood, rooted to the spot by a morbid curiosity that overshadowed my fear. The usual sterile smell of a public restroom was there, but underneath it was something else, something foul, a stench that spoke of decay and secrets long buried. The first thing I noticed was the floor, not just wet from a leaking faucet or a careless wash, but slick with something darker, thicker. It was smeared across the white tiles, dragged in patterns that my mind refused to recognize. Patches of red-brown stained the floor, trailing away like grotesque breadcrumbs leading towards the far stall. The air felt heavier as I moved forward, each step tentative, as if the very ground beneath me might give way. The once familiar sound of my footsteps now echoed ominously, a grim drumbeat to the pounding of my heart. Why hadn't I turned back? Why hadn't I listened to the primal part of my brain screaming for me to flee? I approached the last stall, the source of the sinister trail. My breath caught in my throat. The door was slightly ajar, swaying gently, as if moved by an unseen hand. The fluorescent light above flickered rapidly, as if struggling to reveal the horror that lay beyond. With a trembling hand, I pushed the door, the metal cold and unyielding against my fingertips. The scene inside was something out of a nightmare. Blood, so much blood. It was as if the very walls wept crimson tears. It coated the toilet, splattered across the walls, pooled ominously on the floor. But it was the figure, oh God, the figure that will forever haunt my dreams. Slumped against the far wall was a body, or what was left of it. Limbs twisted in unnatural angles, skin pale and torn, eyes wide open in a silent scream of terror. It was as if the life had been drained out of the person, leaving behind a hollow shell. But worse than the sight was the realization, the cold, gut-wrenching understanding that this was no random act of violence. This was methodical, intentional. I stumbled back, bile racing in my throat, a scream building within me but trapped by the vice of fear. I had to get out. I had to escape this charnel house, this tableau of death. But as I turned to flee, my eyes caught on a detail I had missaid, a detail that froze me to the spot. Etched into the blood-soaked tile almost as an afterthought was a message. A simple, chilling message. You're next. The world spun, and a darkness encroached on the edges of my vision. But it was then, in that moment of utter despair, that I heard it. A sound that snapped me out of my paralysis. A sound far more terrifying than any visual horror could be. The unmistakable sound of the washroom door creaking open behind me. My heart hammered against my chest, a frantic drummer signaling an impending doom. Time seemed to slow, every second stretching out like an eternity as I stood there, frozen in horror. The message scrawled in blood echoed in my mind, a macabre mantra that filled me with an icy dread. You're next. But it was the sound, that slow, deliberate creak of the door opening behind me, that shattered the last vestiges of my denial. I didn't want to turn around, didn't want to confront whatever nightmare was unfolding behind me. But survival, that deep, primal instinct, took over. I spun around, my breath caught in a strangled gasp, expecting to come face to face with a monster, a creature of darkness. But it was Eli, the new owner, standing there. Yet the man before me bore little resemblance to the overly friendly shopkeeper I'd met before. His eyes were wide, maniacal, reflecting a madness that sent shivers down my spine. His smile was twisted, a grotesque parody of greeting. And in his hand, he clutched a bloody wrench, its metal surface glistening ominously under the flickering lights. My mind screamed to run, but my body was a step behind, paralyzed by the sheer terror of the moment. Eli took a step forward, his movement deliberate, predatory. "You shouldn't have seen this," he said, his voice a chilling whisper that contrasted starkly with the jovial tone I remembered. "But now that you have, well," I could see it then, the madness, the darkness that lurked behind his eyes. It was the look of a man who had embraced the abyss, who had become a vessel for something utterly inhuman. The small, cluttered washroom suddenly felt like a trap, a cage designed not to keep something out, but to keep me in. With every ounce of willpower, I forced my legs to move, my body to respond. I lunged towards the door, past Eli, feeling the air shift as the wrench swung through where my head had been moments before. I could hear him behind me, footsteps heavy with intent, a predator in pursuit of his prey. The rain outside had intensified, turning the ground into a slippery morass, a mirror of the chaos unfolding within me. But fear lent me speed, propelling me forward through the storm, away from the washroom, away from Eli, away from the nightmare. But freedom was a cruel illusion. The lot was empty, the world around me abandoned to my plight. My car, my sole beacon of escape, was across the lot, but it felt a continent away. Eli's footsteps echoed in my ears, not just sounds now, but harbingers of death, chasing me, always just a step behind. The world around me was a blur, shapes and colors melding into a tapestry of fear as I dashed through the pelting rain, each drop a cold lash against my skin. The once familiar surroundings of Mike's Motor Mart had morphed into a nightmarish landscape, with every shadow a hiding place for horrors untold. Every flash of lightning, revealing glimpses of a reality I no longer recognized. My breath came in ragged gasps, my lungs burning with the effort of sustaining my flight. The rain-soaked ground beneath my feet was treacherous, mud grasping at my shoes like hands trying to drag me back to the abyss I was fleeing from. But the terror propelling me forward was relentless, a living thing within me that overshadowed all else. Behind me, the sound of Eli's pursuit was a constant presence, the slap of his footsteps on wet pavement, a grotesque symphony that filled the night. I dared not look back, for fear that the sight of him would freeze me in my tracks. But the image of his twisted, blood-stained visage was etched into my mind's eye, a haunting specter that spurred me onward. Finally, my car came into view, a lone sentinel in the deserted lot, its familiar form a beacon of hope in the engulfing darkness. My hands shook violently as I fumbled with the keys, the simple act of unlocking the door an insurmountable task as panic clouded my thoughts. The sound of Eli's approach grew ominously closer, a reminder that death was but a heartbeat away. With a cry of sheer desperation, I threw myself into the car, slamming the door shut just as Eli reached it. He pounded on the window, his face a mask of rage and madness, his mouth forming words that were lost in the howling wind. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I started the engine and floored the accelerator, the car lurching forward, away from the nightmare that had almost claimed me. As I drove, the station receded in the rearview mirror, becoming nothing more than a dark shape against the stormy backdrop. But the relief of escapee was short-lived. In the distance, behind the fleeing figure of my car, flames began to rise, illuminating the night sky with an eerie glow. The fire spread quickly, consuming the small gas station, erasing physical evidence of the horrors it contained but searing them forever in my memory. The news reports later spoke of a devastating fire at Mike's Motor Mart, a tragedy that revealed a sinister secret hidden beneath the ashes. Firefighters discovered multiple bodies in the charred remnants, victims of a horror that the small community could scarcely comprehend. Eli, the friendly station owner with the dark past, had vanished, a specter whose presence lingered long after the flames had died down. The revelation of his gruesome act sent ripples of shock and disbelief through the town, a grim reminder of the evil that can lurk behind the most mundane facades. But for me, the horror was far from over. As the authorities pieced together the gruesome puzzle, I was left to grapple with the memories of that night, the haunting images and sounds etched into my psyche. The ordeal at Mike's Motor Mart was a stark reminder of the fragility of our perceptions, the ease with which the veneer of normalcy can be stripped away to reveal the abyss beneath. And as I tried to move on, to leave behind the terror and the nightmares, one chilling fact remained. Eli was still out there, his madness unchecked, a shadow that lingered in the corners of my mind, a constant reminder of the night when horror became my reality. The aftermath of that harrowing night at Mike's Motor Mart unfolded like a surreal, disjointed dream. The relentless pursuit of the authorities for Eli, the media frenzy surrounding the grim discoveries, and the collective mourning of a small community grappling with the unthinkable horror that had unfolded in their midst. It all seemed to swirl around me, a maelstrom of fear, disbelief, and despair. Yet amidst the chaos, a disturbing silence lingered, a void where Eli's fate should have been. He had vanished, dissolving into the night like a specter, leaving behind a trail of grief and unanswered questions. The man who had once greeted me with a deceptive smile was now a ghost, a shadow haunting the edges of my thoughts, his whereabouts a mystery that gnawed at the very fabric of my sanity. Sleep became an elusive phantom, taunting me with the promise of rest, only to snatch it away with nightmares that replayed the horrors over and over. Every creak of the house, every shadow thrown by the moonlight, sent my heart racing, a constant reminder of the terror that had brushed so chillingly close to my own existence. The world around me had changed, or perhaps it was I who had changed. My eyes opened to the darkness that could lurk beneath the surface of everyday life. Trust became a concept as foreign and elusive as sleep. Every stranger a potential monster hiding behind a mask of normality. The community tried to heal, to rebuild the trust and safety shattered by Eli's actions, but the scars ran deep. Parents hugged their children a little tighter, neighbors watched each other with a hint of suspicion, and the once friendly conversations in local stores were now tinged with a sense of wariness. As for me, I became a shell of my former self, a man haunted not just by the events I had survived, but by the chilling uncertainty of Eli's fate. The question of where he was, whether he was planning his next horror, whether he was watching from the shadows, became a constant, suffocating presence. And then came the whispers, rumors that chilled me to my core. Sightings of a man matching Eli's description in towns nearby, stories of missing travelers, unexplained occurrences that bore the sinister hallmark of his madness. With each whispered tale, the horrifying possibility grew that Eli was out there, biding his time, a predator in the darkness, waiting to strike again. The world moved on, but I remained trapped in that night, a prisoner of my own memories and fears. The closure I craved remained just out of reach, a tantalizing possibility overshadowed by the ever-present dread of what might come next. And in the deepest, darkest hours of the night, when the world is silent and the barriers between past and present thin, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, Eli is watching, waiting. A dark reminder of the evil that walks among us, hidden in plain sight.